Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to one of our educational webinars for the Long Distance Real Estate Investors Group. You can find our group on Facebook, but just by searching Long Distance Real Estate Investors. I'm one of your co-hosts. My name's Jennifer Ward, and a little bit about me, if you're just joining in on one of our webinars for the first time, is I'm a real estate investor and stay-at-home mom. I live in Denver. And I have been investing in Indianapolis for the last 3 years. So we have 5 long-term rentals there. And I am doing a few flips as we currently speak. And we also house hack in Denver and looking to expand into short-term rentals, possibly in Georgia. So that's a little bit about me. And I also have here with me my co-host, Raina.
Hi, everyone. Raina Bias here. I'm also a long distance real estate investor. I live in Denver and we invest primarily in Memphis, and we also have a property in Birmingham as well. I mainly do the BRRRR method, but I have flipped a couple houses. And yeah, I'd love to learn about real estate, and this webinar I'm super excited about because it's a topic that I think is very, very misunderstood. And so we actually have the queen of Section 8 housing here to tell us a little bit more about this interesting strategy.
Yes, absolutely. I'm so excited. So today we are talking about renting to Section 8 tenants, and our expert guest speaker today is Jennifer Donnelly, and she has been doing Section 8 or renting to Section 8 tenants since 2018. And I think you said you have like over 30 plus properties, Jennifer. Wow, but that's amazing. And she's based out of St. Louis and has primarily most of your properties in St. Louis, I believe.
Yeah, St. Louis area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm going to have Jennifer go ahead and share with us a little bit about her story, and we're going to then deep dive into some questions that we probably all have about Section 8.
Cool. Like you said, I'm in the St. Louis area. I got started in the middle of 2018. I really came to real estate investing kind of at a point of desperation. My husband and I own a cleaning business. We still have that today, but it was not doing well in 2018, and knew we needed to make some changes to that business. But I knew that was going to be kind of a long runway to fix that business. And so I wanted to diversify our income so we weren't just dependent on one income stream. So I took a course, started buying real estate. And then in the middle, I had about a half a dozen rentals. And in the middle of 2019, I did a 1031 exchange. Actually, I sold a warehouse that we owned and bought a package of 12 single family occupied rentals. And about half of those properties had Section 8 tenants in them. Prior to that, probably like many, many people, I didn't take Section 8 because everything that I had heard about Section 8 was negative. The tenants are awful. They're going to trash your house. They're not going to pay their portion. The housing authority is difficult to deal with. The rents are low, on and on and on. I thought, well, shoot, I would get all these calls. Do you take Section 8? Do you take Section 8 when I would put my properties out for rent? But I always say, no. But then once I had a few Section 8 properties that I owned, I started to realize I don't think this has to be terrible. I think done right, we could talk a lot about what that means, I think this can be really stable and profitable. So I started creating systems and processes and things like that. And I started kind of testing my theories along the way. And today, that's my primary focus. So I'm getting ready to close on my 37th unit on Monday. Most of those are single families. 3 of those buildings are duplexes. And I've got, I think, 25 of the current 37 have Section 8 tenants in them. And eventually of the 37, 32 will have Section 8 tenants. Just some of them still have some inherited tenants and things like that in them. And over time, what I have really come to feel is there's really 5 reasons that I think Section 8 is a great way to go. If you go to Google and put in, should I take Section 8, what you'll typically find people say in terms of the pros are the rent is guaranteed. So the way that Section 8 works is it's an income-based program for, low-income people. So the tenant may pay a portion of their rent because it's income-based. So if they have some income, they're going to pay up to 30% of their income towards their housing. So a portion of the rent will come from the government, and then a portion may come from the tenant if they have some income. But obviously that government side is guaranteed. So that's nice. And as we've gone through these eviction moratoriums for the last year and a half, that's been amazing because my guaranteed income from Section 8 more than covers all of my expenses. So I haven't had to worry about that. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the big things that you'll hear. You'll also see there are some pockets and in some places where you can actually get higher rents than you would from market tenants. That's going to be area specific, and there's a bit of an art to that. But if you can figure that out, that's obviously great. Something else that you will see a lot of is that you tend to get longer tenancies because it's a pain in the butt for Section 8 tenants to move from one property to another. They have a lot of paperwork they have to do. It's time sensitive. So the approach I take is I'm going to have some of the nicest properties out there. So if they are already living in the nicest property they can find, they're probably not going to go anywhere. And then a couple other things that I really like about it. The tenant, so as a landlord with going the Section 8 route, I do have rules that I have to follow, but the tenant does as well. And if they don't follow those rules, they can lose their assistance. So, if somebody was helping me pay my mortgage or pay my rent, I'm going to follow their rules to make sure that I get to keep my assistance. And the tenants, especially good tenants, do as well. The biggest thing, though, was I started to realize and think about when I put these properties out for lease, the bulk of my calls are from people wanting to know if I take Section 8. So I started asking my current tenants that I had and people that were calling, tell me about the process to find a property using your Section 8 voucher. And they would say, it is so difficult. It is so difficult for me to find a place to rent. It's especially difficult for me to find a decent place to rent. So what I came to realize was the demand for Section 8 housing is very high and the supply is very low. And that, I believe, is the case in most markets across the country because, again, landlords don't like to take it, generally speaking. And there's a fair number of people that are on it. So as a business person, when demand is high and supply is low, I want to have a supply because then I can really maximize that for my benefit. And what that looks like for me is, good tenants who stay a long time.
Wow, it's awesome information. So tell us, you gave a brief overview of kind of what Section 8 is. How do you get involved in getting a Section 8 tenant?
Yeah, great question. So when people say Section 8, that's what I'll often, that's how I refer to it as well. But it's actually the Housing Choice Voucher Program, or HCV. And the way it works is it's federally funded, but it's locally administered through housing authorities. Every county is going to have its own public housing authority, PHA. You'll hear that word a lot, HA or PHA. And the reason that's important is because even though the big bucket items are the same, exactly how each PHA is run varies pretty widely, and their processes will vary as well because they have a fair amount of autonomy in creating a lot of their own processes. Plus, some are very responsive, some are not. So it's really important for us as landlords to kind of get involved and get to know our local housing authority so that we can figure out how they operate. But here's one thing that is consistent. People always say, how do I get my house approved for Section 8? You don't, at least not at first. What you do is you put your property out for lease just like you normally would for a market tenant. You market it, you show the property, you screen your tenants. And then at the point where you typically sign a lease, collect the deposit, that's where the process changes. The tenant, the Section 8 tenant, somebody who has a housing choice voucher, they've qualified based on their income, and they literally have a paper voucher that they have that says, I'm qualified for this program. They will have paperwork. So we have to sit down, fill out that paperwork. That gets turned into the housing authority, and then the housing authority will contact the landlord to schedule an inspection. So you do have an extra inspection. Also set the rent. So you're going to ask for a certain amount of rent and they're either going to give it to you or they're not. And there's maybe some negotiation there. Once you get through those things, then they are going to authorize the move-in and you move your tenant in. You have a contract then that you sign with the housing authority as well. And from there, it's pretty much just like having a regular market tenant. But basically, you find the tenant with the voucher, then go through the Section 8 process.
How long does the process take from where it deviates from what is normally a rental to Section 8?
That's a good question. And it varies pretty widely from people that I've talked to around the country. I have 2 housing authorities that I deal with here, and it even varies with them. But for us here, from the time we approve a tenant till the time we get them moved in is typically 2 to 4 weeks.
Okay.
So it does add, it adds 2 to 4 weeks. Let's say it adds 3 weeks of time. In other parts of the country, I've heard it's longer. I don't hear much quicker than that. The other thing is, I know all the processes now, so I can push, right? I send the paperwork in, I send an email the next day and the next day and the next day to make sure, like, are we moving this system along? Whereas I think if you don't know that yet, which that's probably one of the cons, is that the first few that you place, the first 1, 2, 3 people that you place, it might feel difficult because you're learning. But once you know what's supposed to happen, you can push that process along.
Do you self-manage your properties?
Yeah, we do.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. I've got a team member, an employee that works for me, and I call her my operations manager, and she does a lot of the running. And then I do most of the administration.
Got it. Yeah. And then going back to, like, your reasons of wanting to place Section 8 tenants. So how long would you say your average Section 8 tenant is staying with your property, since you do try to offer the nicest property around? What kind of turnover on average are you experiencing with your properties?
Well, I haven't been doing it that long, so
that's true.
I'll hedge a little bit there, but I've only had, let me think about this. I've had 2 turnovers this year out of 30 some odd properties. So
yeah,
not very many.
Yeah.
And I have 1 problem property. Maybe you guys have experienced this, but I've turned it 3 times in the last 2.5 years. And I've only had 2 other turns aside from that. So I probably should sell that, but I'm stubborn and I'm like, I'm going to figure this out. And I don't want to just give up on it yet.
Right. Yeah. I do know what that's like.
Yeah.
So I just last year, or in 2021 in January, so I placed my first Section 8 tenant when I had a property go vacant because, well, we finally got the renters who were occupying it but not paying rent for a year plus because of the moratorium, even though they were able to pay rent, and that's what was my driver to place a Section 8 tenant. I was like, I am not going to go through this again because this was definitely, I think, something, the whole pandemic, I think nobody would have anticipated what had come to surpass. And
it was like the black swan. Nobody had their bingo card. Like, this is just bananas.
Yeah. And so I was like, you know what? I can't afford, I have a mortgage. I can't afford that again. It drained our savings trying to keep up with the mortgage and as well as our other properties and the maintenance and everything that goes on. And I was like, if this happens again, then I want to be guaranteed that I'm going to get my rent paid and I can keep up with all my expenses and I don't have to drain my savings, which is why I got into real estate, was to try to generate
build that
savings, but it has not happened yet.
Yep.
And so as soon as we got those people out, I said, all right, I'm going to try out this Section 8. And so far I've been really happy with the 1 tenant we've placed. And what I had found, was that because it's a single family home, we've had incredible amount of interest of people with the voucher wanting to rent the home. Because I feel like what's available to most, like you were saying, like the supply is super low, but the demand is really high. And I'm assuming for most of the supply that's out there, it's probably with apartment complexes, and so I'm just, taking a guess that there's not very many single family homes out there. And when it comes to real estate investors, like like I like to call myself a mom and pop real estate investor. I think most of us have single family homes. And so it's really, up to us wanting to provide that supply of single family homes to these, to the Section 8 tenants. So that's, so far was my experience of just like, all right, I will never have an issue being able to rent out our single family homes if we're advertising to Section 8 for sure. So,
yeah. I'd love to talk about, this kind of leads me to, I'd love to talk about the pros of Section 8 and how they actually played out for you.
Yeah.
You mentioned there was 5 pros. And so you talked about the length of stay. You only had 2 people turn over out of 34 of your properties. We talk about guaranteed income from the government. How did that play out during the pandemic? Like what did that look like for you and your properties?
I mean, I'm owed no money today. I've got, let's see, it's the 4th. So I've got a bunch of texts I got to send, right, to get all of my people to pay their portions by tomorrow. But on the 1st or 31st of October, I'm not owed any rent from anyone. So what I found, Jennifer, it's really interesting because a lot of, and I had the same experience too, when you're a little bit smaller, but when you have a lot of turnover and you can't keep those properties stable and occupied and the rent paid, it's impossible to build your cash reserves. But in the last year, I've just watched my bank account. I'm like, this is what I got into this for. But it took until this year for me to see that, to when I had a volume of properties where everybody's paying, no one's leaving. So now I can see how that's going to build long term. Of course, the properties have appreciated too. I mean, it's been a really good time to own property. But we've really been able to weather the pandemic really, really well because it's been so stable.
Yeah.
Have you had tenants that haven't paid their portion?
No. No. And here's why. So there's a lot that actually goes into this, but first of all, I've learned I require my Section 8 tenants to have some income, typically about 1.5 times the rent, but that's going to vary widely across the country depending on where you're at. So you're probably going to have to my advice would be to tinker with that a little bit. But like most of my properties are 3-bedroom properties, and I require $1,750 in monthly income from my 3-bedroom property Section 8 tenants. Because I have found, so I'm going to chase a little rabbit here, Raina, if that's okay. But a lot of other people that I've talked to that do Section 8, they actually want tenants that have no income because 100% of the rent is coming from the government. So it's 100% guaranteed. That sounds really good in theory, but what I found in practice was that my tenants that had income were much more stable. They're easier to deal with. They take better care of the property. And I think it's because if you think about it, if you have almost no income, you're making really tough decisions every single day. How am I going to pay the utilities? How am I going to get the groceries? It's that's really tough. But if you've got some income, you can breathe a little bit, right? You've got a little bit of room. So that's my theory. I don't know if it's true. I just know in practice, when they have income, they have been much better tenants. So that's sort of that's part of the lead up. But I also make it very, very clear to them, if you don't pay your portion, we will let the housing authority know. We will file for eviction after 25 days. We don't mess around. And if they get evicted, they lose their voucher. Here's the other thing. The beauty of Section 8 is it's income-based. So if their income changes, all they have to do is notify their caseworker, and then their rent portion changes. And I had a bunch of people that happened with during the pandemic. They would call and they would say, I'm so sorry. I lost my job. My hours were cut. My kids are, whatever 100 reasons, right, that happened. I would say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Have you called your caseworker? They would do that. And within a few days, we would get new paperwork showing they used to pay $300 a month. That was their portion. Now it's down to $0. So I didn't have anybody not pay their portion.
Wow.
That's awesome. I was not aware of that. So that's incredible information.
It's huge. Yeah. So there's really no reason that they shouldn't be paying, because either they need to be paying 30% of their income, which is what you would require of a market tenant, right? Most of us require about 3 times income for a market tenant.
Yeah.
Or if they don't have that same income, they can just call their caseworker and their portion will change.
So I guess this is a good segue to kind of get into more of the questions about screening for tenants, once you put it out there. And when you said 1.5 times of income, was that including their eligible voucher plus any income, or was that just from their own income and no voucher amount included?
So that's a really good question. Our housing authorities here do not tell us how much their voucher is for or how much they're going to pay or anything. We're like driving blind here in St. Louis.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay, because in Indianapolis, we can request some document, I think like their voucher to see how much they're eligible for.
Yes. Excellent. And they probably will even tell you how much they're going to have to pay. Yep. So I would probably still set some sort of a minimum, $1,200 a month, $1,500, depending on your market and kind of what incomes tend to run. Because again, I've just found if they have income, they tend to be just better tenants in general. So just tinker with that. Here's how I come up with my number. I went through all my tenants like a year ago and I segmented them. The ones I love, I'd had take 100 of, the ones that are kind of middle of the road, and the ones I wish I never would have approved. And all of my top tenants had at least $1,750 a month in income. So it was scientific for me, but it's hard for me to say this is the number you should use because incomes are going to vary some. Although you guys are both investing in more like Midwest or, southern areas. So it might be sort of similar.
Okay. Okay. That's a great tip. One of the big questions I had when I was trying to find fill my vacant unit with a Section 8 tenant was like credit score. Should I factor that in since most of their rent's going to be paid, but there's still that portion typically for most or for a lot of them where they have to pay for themselves. So should I consider credit score, and if so, like should I lower the credit score? And what did you decide?
Here's what I do. I still pull their credit. I don't care very much about their credit score. I don't care actually at all about their credit score. What I'm looking for is, have they paid at least some of the accounts that they've opened in the last few years on time? If every single account they've ever opened in their whole life has gone to collections, I'm going to decline them. Obviously, if there's landlord collections on there, that's a big red flag. And then I also look to see, do they owe any money to the utility companies, because I require them to put the utilities in their name. And so if they do, they've got to get those paid off before I will approve them. So that's what I look at more so, or instead of credit score.
Okay. And then what other requirements do you have for when screening them?
So I require them to send in a copy of their voucher with their application. So the vouchers look the same pretty much countrywide. It will tell you which housing authority they work through. It will tell you the two most important things. One, it'll tell you how many bedrooms they're approved for, and that's going to be dependent on their family size. And the reason that is important is because that will be a big determiner in how much in rent that they will be able to pay, total. So my rule is their voucher has to be for the same number of bedrooms that I have in my house. So if I have a 3-bedroom house, I will not take somebody that has a 2-bedroom voucher because I'm going to be paid like I have a 2-bedroom house. Does that make sense? The other thing it tells you is when the voucher was issued. That's less important, but it tells you when the voucher expires. So like I said, they have a window when they have to get into a new place. And if they miss it, there is sometimes an extension, but that'll be listed on the voucher as well. And if they miss it again, they're just out of luck. And so I've had people apply and they on an expired voucher. And then I will email the caseworker because it tells me who the caseworker is. And the caseworker will say, no, they can't move. I don't even know either. So I wouldn't want to waste my time vetting this person if they can't move into my property. So that's something that's different, obviously, over, market tenants. Let me see. I do require income. People are sometimes surprised by that as well. And then security deposit. I do require a security deposit of my Section 8 tenants. And I have found that the good ones expect that and are ready to pay it. One of the things I do is I just have a set amount based on the number of bedrooms that I require for my deposit, because there is that rent negotiation that goes on with the housing authority. You don't know for sure what your rent amount is going to be. So if you say it's the same as the first month's rent, I don't know for sure what that number is going to be. And I don't like that. So what I do, so my 3-bedroom houses tend to run, it's actually going up. I probably should increase it. But prior to this year, they were about $1,000 a month. So what I do is on my 3-bedroom properties, I require $1,000 security deposit. And on my 4 bedrooms, I require $1,200. It's just flat. That way I always know. I never have to go look or decide or question. It's just always $1,000. And then so here in St. Louis, you guys may have something similar in your markets, depending on which municipality you're in. Some of the utilities have to stay in the landlord's name. And on those utilities, I bill those forward to the tenant, which you can do. And so later in the process, I will text them and I will say, the security deposit is $1,000. We bill this forward to our tenants, these utilities. And then we do on our single families require the tenants to maintain the landscaping, mow the lawn, and clean the gutters. Are you able to pay the deposit and the utilities each month? Each month, and take care of those maintenance items. Because then that way, we've already covered that conversation. We're not going to get all the way into having them approve when they say, oh, well, I can't pay the deposit, so it avoids all those issues. And then the last thing I do, and some of this, or a fair amount of it, I do for my market tenants as well. If I take a market tenant, or I was doing for market tenants, I do a home visit at their current residence as the very last piece of the application process. Because some things you're just never going to find out through paperwork.
Yeah. Yeah. And with that home visit, so I did that as well. I think I saw it suggested somewhere on one of the Section 8 forums, but did you wait and do that after you've got through the whole inspection process, or
no, it's before they're even approved.
Okay. It's based off, for their approval. Got it.
Before they're approved. And I should back up and say, so there are some areas where you have to take Section 8. So if your local town, county, or state has a law against source of income discrimination, you have to take Section 8 tenants and you have to take market tenants. You cannot differentiate. So just know that if anybody that's watching this, I'm not a lawyer, talk to your attorney, all that stuff. Oh wait, Raina's a lawyer. Talk to her. So first of all, know that. And then whatever you do, if you're taking both, if you can, should, or are taking both market and Section 8 tenants on a property, you have to screen them all the same, except for the things that have to be different, such as, getting the voucher income, things like that. So I do want to say that. But yeah, what I do on the home visit is I do all the paperwork first. And then the very last thing I do is I call them and say, we want to move you to the home visit phase of our application process. And then I literally show up with a checklist on a clipboard. Feels a little odd and clinical, but it's super necessary. And I just say, hey, thanks for letting me come out. Will you show me around? And then at that point, usually at this point, I'm comfortable either approving them, or if I'm not going to approve them based on the home visit, if I am going to approve them, I'll just tell them right then and there. If I'm not going to, I'll say, thanks so much. We have our property management meeting on Monday and we'll get back to you. And then I'll usually email them and let them know. But if I go ahead and approve them, then I'll say, do you have time to sit down and go over the lease and complete your housing authority paperwork?
Okay. Do you do, imagine it's hard to do surprise, but do you do surprise home visits?
It's a great question. Everybody asks me that. I don't, because I figure if they can clean up well enough to pass the home visit, they can clean up well enough to get their security deposit back, which is really all I care about.
Got it.
I mean, you have a 2-year-old, you said, I wouldn't necessarily want somebody showing up. I have 3 kids. If you show up to my house surprise someday, it could be a little rough. So give me a day or two to bring
Absolutely. We all have those days.
Yeah, exactly. So I try to do the same.
Yeah, I was just telling my husband yesterday, I used to be a tidy person, and now I just don't think.
So hard with little people living in your house.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's all. I thank you so much for laying it all out like that. Definitely makes sense. I'm wondering if you can, because right now I'm doing that, and I guess I should check the rules, but I'm saying like I'm only accepting Section 8 tenants. Yeah. So I'm not accepting market tenants. I'm wondering if that's allowed or if that's based off that rule that you can't discriminate based on source of income.
Yeah, check and see. So like here in St. Louis County, I can say I'm only taking Section 8, which is what I do. But in St. Louis City, you have to take everybody. Oh. So you should have laws, I would think, that are pretty easy to find.
Yeah.
Do you look for houses in certain, I guess, looking at the housing authority? Do you prefer houses in certain areas because it has a really good housing authority in there? Do you do that?
Not so much the housing authority, because I'm kind of limited to the two that I have here. If you're in an area that's got several, then I think you definitely could. And I know that there's people even here in St. Louis that prefer one, and you will only take one and not the other. So you can certainly do that if it's allowed, check your blah, 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 whatever. But a big thing is that Section 8 rents are going to be capped based on what the local housing authority's payment standard for an area. Sometimes they do it by a whole metro area, or it could even be down at the zip code level. So for us, what this means, and this is going to be the case really around the country. So like in St. Louis City is a really good example. You can be in St. Louis City and the same zip code will have a huge variance in the quality of rentals. You have really nice high-end A rentals in one part, and then you have kind of not as expensive, Class C rentals in a mile or two away. So what I will do is go look up the payment standard for that housing, for that zip code, and determine like where's my ceiling at on rents, so that I'm not buying up in the A area where my Section 8 rents are not going to be able to keep up. So I do look at that. And then Section 8 is very interesting. The rents that they will allow are determined almost entirely based on the number of bedrooms. So the things in the market that get us more rent, granite countertops, totally rehabbed, basements, square footage, extra bedrooms, you get a little bit of a bump for those things, but very, very small. It's almost completely based on the number of bedrooms. So there is typically outliers that you can find if you tinker and look a little bit. So what that means for me is I want to try to find like the smallest house surrounded by big houses, because I'm going to be able to buy that house like it's smaller, but I get rents as if it's one of those bigger properties. But the opposite can also happen. And a good example is, you guys have probably heard of the town Ferguson. I own 4 properties in Ferguson. I love Ferguson. And the average 3-bedroom rent is like $1,000 in Ferguson. Well, I own a big 3-bed, 3-bath, beautiful, totally rehabbed property in Ferguson. Market rent's probably $1,350. But my Section 8 rent right out of the gate was only $1,115 because it's bordered all the way around by much smaller properties. So you just have to kind of test that out. And if you're in an area where you can get good rent comps through Rent-A-Meter and things like that, you can usually tell, am I going to be looking for kind of above comparables or am I in line? Because most housing authorities do look at market comparables as well, rent comparables.
Okay.
In the case that you're getting less rent than what's market, do you then just say, okay, forget Section 8, I'll just put in a normal, not normal, but I'll just put in a market?
A market tenant. You certainly can. I didn't. I kind of look at my portfolio on the whole, and I knew that tenant was going to be there forever. She had been at her prior place 10 years and was only leaving because they were selling the property and they made her vacate. Yeah. So I thought, you know what, I'll get my rent increases over the next few years, and what I'm losing in month-to-month rent, I'm going to make up for and hopefully never having a turnover. And she's been there a couple of years, and she just signed a 2-year lease. So, and she told me when I talked to her, she's like, I'm never leaving, just so you know.
How do rent increases work then?
I'm glad you got that. So Jennifer, did you submit for a rent increase on yours that renews in January, or when does it renew? Do you know?
It'll probably, yeah, I think it was just a year lease, so it'll probably renew in January of 22.
Okay, so check and see, because every housing authority has a process for submitting for annual rent increases, but there's usually a lot of rules around it. It's very time sensitive, and they'll have paperwork, and it's usually very, very easy. You just send in the piece of paper, here's what I'm asking for, and you get it or you don't. Mm-hmm. My rule with my housing authorities, because the way they work is they're going to give you as much as they can, up to like the rent comparables, and up to the amount that you ask for. So I feel like if I get the amount that I ask for, I didn't ask enough, right? Yeah. Because what'll happen is if I ask for $100 a month increase and they can only give me 50, then that's what they'll give me. But if I ask for 100 and get 100, I'm like, dang it, didn't ask for enough. Yeah. So just the bottom line is check with your housing authority. It'll probably be time banded in some way.
Got it.
So you might have missed the window, but you also might not have. But here we have a 30-day window every renewal that we can submit paperwork.
Got it. And so are you saying like the renewal or like the window to request that rent increase, is it a standard time period for anybody regardless of when the lease expires? Or
so the housing authorities determine that themselves. Like I've seen some of them in the country that say you can submit for it anytime after, like basically once a year after the first year, any time frame, but you can't do it more frequently than a year. So then you're not time banded. But for me here, it's 60 to 90 days before the renewal. So if you send it in on day 91 or day 59, it's going to get declined. But each housing authority has their own little rules.
Yeah, I was curious about that. Like how much does the housing authority approve, rental increases? And
that's another thing that they vary on really widely. I mean, I've gotten as much as $300 a month on an increase. So I bought, in that package that I bought, one of them is just what I'm talking about. Little tiny 3-bedroom house surrounded by a bunch of big 3-bedroom houses. Those market houses were renting for like $1,250 a month, and mine was rented for $850. And I was brand new, and I requested $1,150 right out of the gate, and I got it. So that's enormous. I mean, that's huge, right?
Yeah.
But ours here, all they do is they just compare it to market comps, and they don't limit it. But I have seen and heard of others around the country that will say we'll give you no more than $50 a month. So again, the answer is it depends on your housing authority. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If you increase the rents, does that mean that the portion that the tenant is paying is increased? And so are you still running into a risk that they're going to jump ship because of the increase?
Yeah, great question. So It's kind of a complicated question, but up to the payment standard, which is the maximum that the housing authority will pay, as long as your rent is not going over the payment standard, the tenant's portion will still only be based on their 30% of income. It will not affect what they pay. If you're in a situation where the market rent comps support going above that payment standard, then they will grant that rent increase and the tenant has to make up that difference. So you do just kind of have to watch that, but they should tell you if you're going above the payment standard, which will then impact how much the tenant pays. But as long as you're underneath the payment standard, it does not impact the tenant's amount. The other thing that you can do if it goes above the payment standard and it puts them in a difficult position, you can always decline to actually implement the increase.
Well, I guess could you at that point say, well, what if I just accepted the increase up to your payment standard?
You could do that too. Okay. Yeah, you can do that too.
Got it. Yeah. So I'm curious on your opinion on this strategy that I did with my tenant. So, it was our first one. And so we're learning, how the housing authority operates when it came to approving the rent amount. And I'm trying to recall everything, but I believe, we were trying to get close to 1,000 in rent. They, I think, ended up saying that, at least with this tenant we had approved, that, they were only going to pay, let's say, up to close to 900. But if utilities were factored into it, then they would pay something around $12.50. And we thought, I feel like they're charging a lot for utilities for this house. Like, I feel like they're overestimating what the utilities would cost. So then we ended up deciding, well, we'll cover the utilities. We'll pay for the utilities. And so I worked it out. So we're doing that. And then we now get, up to $12.50 a month for the property. And I, thought with our tenant, I was like, I did have concerns about, well, what if the utilities do go over, what we're being paid per month? So I was like, hey, if you keep your utilities at this amount, if you make it under that amount and we have an overage, like we're getting paid more than what we had to pay out, then we'll give you the difference, quarterly, so it's like a little, little cash that she might get quarterly based on her utility usage. But what has your experience been so far? Like, if you have covered utilities? And
that's an interesting approach. The one thing I think the caveat I would say is just be sure that's allowed based on, because I'm not sure if the HAP contract allows you to do that.
Oh, okay.
Usually what I hear, though, quite honestly, is
a gift card.
I got you something. Yeah. What I usually hear is that landlords have like a side deal with the tenant where the tenant's paying them more in cash than what the housing authority allowed in rent, which is a big fat no-no. So that it's usually the other way around that I hear it. So I'm not sure. I don't know if that's allowed or not. That's an interesting approach. My philosophy has always been, I don't want to pay any utilities because I don't want to be responsible for it. I don't want to have to worry about them using too much or, whatever. But it's probably just going to be trial and error. I mean, I agree with you. $350 a month seems like quite a lot for utilities. So you'll just find out, over time if that's true or not. And
got it. But for your best practice right now is to just not cover utilities. And
yeah, it's really more just almost like an ease of business thing. I think I just want fewer things to have to worry about.
Yeah.
So I'm super curious, though. I'm going to check back. I'll try to remember to check back with you in a year or two and see, how that's going and if the usage is in line with what you're getting in extra rent.
Yeah, it sounds bad. I'm just now starting to track.
Yeah, we're all learning. I get it.
So I'm trying to get it all lined up of how much the utilities were for her unit, her property. And then I'm going to follow up with her and let her know, like, hey, we're, you're not saving any money here.
Yeah, that'll be really interesting.
Yeah. So, okay, cool.
You said something very interesting earlier on, which is that housing authorities may sometimes pay over what market rent is. Tell us more about that situation.
That is when you have, it's that similar scenario. So it's easier if I can explain it. So this property that I have is in a town called Florissant. That doesn't really matter to you, but it's a 3-bed, 1-bath slab. It's like 900 square feet. So it's small. It is bordered all the way around it by 1,500 3-2s with basements. So this little house on the market might only get like $1,000, maybe not even that, because it's just so small. But because the housing authority only really looks at bedrooms, when they run comps, they pull in all those big house comps. So then I'm able, instead of getting 1,000 or 900, I'm able to get 1,250. Another thing is, again, like granite countertops and things like that. If you have a house that's not really been rehabbed, so it's got dated bathrooms or whatever, but everything around it that's renting out is nicer, more updated, you're going to pull in those higher comps. And so you're going to get more in rent from Section 8 than you would from market tenants.
Okay, got it. Okay, so it has to do with kind of just the comparables. I was in a situation where I was looking at a multifamily over in Aurora in close to Denver. And when I looked on Rentometer and when I looked, talked to property managers about the rents for this multifamily, each unit was, let's say it's about $1,000. But the housing authority, because they were all Section 8 tenants, they were paying about $1,200. And I asked the broker about it, and I guess she said maybe there's just less supply, and so they were paying people to take these Section 8 homes. And so when I did the numbers, she did it based on the current rents. And I was so worried that I wouldn't be able to get Section 8, or Section 8 would stop paying above that amount, that I decided not to move forward with the property, because the rents,
the market rents wouldn't keep up.
Yeah, it just wouldn't keep up, and the cap rate was super low based on that. What would you say about that situation? I mean, have you heard about that situation? And
yeah, I hear little sprinkles of that around the country. So I have heard of situations where housing authorities will pay more. Exactly what you're talking about. Supply is low. Also, a lot of them will have programs where they're trying to move people out of low income areas and move them into higher income areas. So sometimes they will pay quite a bit more in those higher income areas than they would, in a lower income area. So I'm sure it's something like that, where they're trying to motivate landlords to participate because they're having a supply issue or something along those lines. But I don't think you're wrong. I mean, the problem with that is that they could end it.
Okay, that was my next question. So yeah, what's the likelihood of them just saying, no, we're not doing that?
That's the part I don't know. I think Denver's probably, and around there is probably a really good test area, because it's just growing so fast. And what I hear, rents are running high and all that sort of thing. So I suspect they're having a very hard time keeping up, with their standard rents. So I just don't know for sure. But like our housing authority here just sent us a memo this week that landlords are gonna have to start covering the sewer. And I don't know exactly what that means, but potentially what that means is that I have to start paying for the sewer and keep it in my name and not bill that forward. I don't know for sure. I have a phone call into them to find out specifics. But if so, our sewer tends to run like $60 a month per house. Well, that's a dramatic hit in your cash flow.
Yeah.
If suddenly I don't get that $60 a month that I was getting before, I'm forking that over that I wasn't having to before. So that's one of the cons of Section 8, is that you do have this third party entity that has a fair amount of control over, what's happening. Now, from what I have read, Section 8 has never missed a payment. I think it's been around for like 40 years or something like that. So I'm not so worried about that, but they can, make changes. And we're talking about rent increases. If you're in an area where the rents are declining and you send in for a rent increase, they could give you a rent decrease.
Got it. Okay.
So
since we're talking about the cons, kind of what do you see as the cons of doing Section 8?
I think the cons from my perspective there are some additional administrative responsibilities with it. For me, the pros outweigh that. But if you're somebody that gets easily frustrated by bureaucracy and dealing with people that are sometimes hard to get a hold of, and weird arbitrary rules and extra inspections, because you're gonna have that initial inspection, and then you're gonna have some sort of an ongoing inspection. Some housing authorities do those annually. Some do them every other year. Ours do it every other year. And what I find is that they're going to fail you for something every single time.
Yep.
So that's their job, right? An inspector's job is to find something wrong. So our approach now actually is don't do any, like some people I see, like they try to prepare 6 ways from Sunday. And then I'm like, no, because they're going to find all kinds of stuff. So we actually leave things undone for them to find. Nothing major, but like, we're going to fix this anyway. Don't do it until this inspector comes through.
Okay.
But if all that stuff like drives you crazy, some people just like don't deal well with that, then it's not a good fit. And it requires extra detail orientation, because there is extra paperwork coming through. The rent portions change at least once. So each year the tenants they go through a recertification where they have to send in new paperwork showing what their updated income is. And so every time the lease renews, their portion will change. So you've got to update your property management software. So I think that's the biggest con that I see, is just that extra legwork.
Yeah. And we had talked about, before we had started recording, but we had talked about your background and kind of the career that you had prior to this, and what led you to being able to handle, I think, the the bureaucracy. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I came out of corporate America. I worked for a large insurance company. And so, you know, bureaucracy is like their mantra. Anywhere in corporate America, that's just the way it is. I had a friend that works at a big company, and she says it's like a bunch of ants moving an elephant. Like, we're moving it, but it's just very slow.
That's great.
But it all, what's that?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
You know, but also it's predictable, right? Like, the bureaucracy is very predictable. And so that, I think, was just a really good lesson in how to approach this. So what I've done is I'm a checklist person. Everything I have is like on a checklist system. So I have all these checklists that mirror the housing authority's processes, you know, plus my own as well. And I think that's been really helpful. And like I said earlier, you know, I'm not afraid if I send in an email and I don't get an answer the next day, I'm going to send another email, and then I'm going to call, and then I'm going to call an email, and I'm going to call the supervisor. Like, that does not bother me. I don't get mad about it. Like, but some people hate that. And if you hate that, this is not your jam.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you also touch on maybe a few specific stories that were learning experiences and hurdles?
Yeah, for sure. So I think the biggest thing I have learned is be very direct, polite and professional, but also like very black and white. This is the lease. We follow it every time. We do not deviate. If you pay late, even if you pay your portion late, the late fees are going to get charged. Don't come asking me to waive them. Like, those sorts of things, because I have just found, like, you give a little bit and then suddenly, you know, here we are off and trying to break all the lease stuff. I mean, so I'm very, very tight about my lease. That's the first thing. But specifically, I approved a tenant, and we're dealing with her move out. I approved her almost exactly 2 years ago. And it's not awful. I mean, I've definitely seen worse move outs, right? When I walked properties or whatever, but she's left a house full of stuff. She left a car.
Oh my God.
You know, I mean, I'm probably, after her deposit, I'm probably going to have a couple grand out of pocket, which is not my goal. You know, my goal is to be made whole, get the thing rented and moved on. But, you know, there were some red flags in her background that I shouldn't have approved her for. The biggest thing was she had very unstable residence history. There had been homelessness, and there had been like 3 months here, 2 months here. So now one of the things I do, I didn't talk about this because I do this for everybody, but if they have not lived for at least 3 years in their last 2 residences, like if that time frame doesn't equal at least 3, they're out. So the unstable history is a big red flag for me at this point. And, you know, the thing that's a bummer is that this is not a bad person, right? Like, she's not a bad person, but in order for her to take care of a single family house, it's a lot more than living in an apartment. You know, I'm asking her to mow the lawn, clean the gutters, keep the landscaping up. That's a big leap for somebody who has never done that stuff on their own. And so that's why the time in the residence, you know, is important. And I think she would just be better served in an apartment or, you know, somewhere with a little bit more wraparound support than what I can provide for her. So that was a big thing. And then I was not able to get any rental history really on her because she had bounced around so much. So those 2 things in particular, you know, I just had to learn the hard way that this is not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that. I'd like to just share, like, when you were talking about the inspections that you will always fail. That was like my big kind of wake up call of how it's going to be, you know, working with the housing authority. You know, we did our turnover and then had the inspection done. And I learned that you probably want to send out whoever does your turnover or whoever does your regular maintenance,
Yep.
have them meet with the inspector.
Yes.
Because the inspector was failing things that, you know, twice, like, because we had the inspection done, well, technically 3 times, and twice he was failing things that, you know, he had pointed out the first time that we fixed. And so I was like, we got to get the guy who did the work out there with him. And then the 3rd time when they met, he's like, well, but that was done. Here it is. He's like, oh, okay, I don't know what the inspector was doing. Like, you know, so basically he failed us for things that the guy had actually fixed. And it was just like, are you even paying attention? Like, are you, is it your job to just make sure you find something? Because it got to pass eventually. I mean,
That's a change we've made in the last year is my operations manager. She goes to every single inspection. They go much more smoothly. A lot of times they'll say, just text me a picture of it being fixed. Or once they know her, she'll say, I promise I'm going to get it fixed, and they'll go ahead and approve it. And then we have to send in a picture later. So
that's good.
That's been huge, is to have somebody meet them there on site. Also with the ongoing inspections, the annual or the biannual, I think it's called if it's twice a year, there will be things often that the tenant caused or is responsible for. And we do bill those back, period, end of story. And I do not have a hard time collecting them. Okay. So again, we just make that really clear to the tenant. I'm kind about it. Like, hey, this thing here, do you want to take care of it or do you want us to? And if they say, I will, I say, no problem. It has to be done by, I give them a week, right? This date, if we're going to have a guy out there on this date, if it's not done by then, we're going to do it and we'll bill it back to you. But I don't, and then I usually, depending on how big it is, I will give them potentially a little bit of, time to pay it off. If it's a larger repair, it may take them a few months to get it fully paid off. But I hear people talk about like, they don't bill that stuff back, and we absolutely bill that stuff back.
Do you mention that in the lease at all?
Oh yeah. Probably like 4 times.
Okay.
Yeah. It's in there a bunch. If any damage is done due to you or your guest negligence, we will bill that back to you.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good, I'm glad you mentioned that. I'll have to make sure that's included in this next lease for sure.
Yeah.
Well, we only have a few minutes left. Raina, did you have a final question?
I think I was about to wrap up like you are.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to ask like one final question. I think that would be helpful. When people are, so as long distance investors, we like to research about the market. Mm-hmm. And now that, if I'm going to acquire another long-term rental, I'm pretty set on always placing a Section 8. So if I'm going to start looking into other markets, what do you recommend the best way to learn more about the housing authority in that market? Are there any communities out there of network communities out there where you can get some valuable information from, or what should you research? Just like, what should you Google?
Yeah. I think what I would do, I haven't done that, because I invest locally, but what I would do is I would get on Bigger Pockets and I would just put a post in like, is anybody investing in Section 8 in this town? Because the housing authorities vary so much, it's going to be pretty dependent on how that one operates. There's a Facebook group called Section 8 Landlords. I'd get on there. I'd do the exact same thing. I would try to find almost all housing authorities that I've Googled across the country. They have a website and they vary widely in how useful they are. So I try to glean as much information from that as possible. I would also call. They usually have a landlord liaison, usually. And I would try to figure out, how are you all determining rents? What are your payment standards? What will you allow for rent comps? Because different housing authorities have different like softwares that they will allow. Like ours won't allow MLS or Zillow comps, but they will allow rent meter comps or rentometer, however you say it. Mm-hmm. I would do all those sorts of things. And the biggest thing I think I would be concerned about, if you're not in a metro area, a pretty good sized metro area, would just be about the demand. But I think the housing authority would be able to let you know that. And also, local investors. Also, if you're going to post in either like Bigger Pockets or on a Facebook group, ask for people that like Section 8 and are successful, because you'll get a bunch of them that are like, don't do it. It's the worst thing ever. Those people are not helpful.
Because they can't handle the bureaucracy.
Yeah, exactly. It's just not their thing.
Yeah, most likely. Okay. And then I know you are a coach for people wanting to rent to Section 8 tenants. So what's the best way for people to reach out to you and find you and learn more?
Yep. So my website is section8educate.com, or you can always email me at jennifer@section8educate.com as well. I've got a YouTube channel also called Section 8 Educate and a Facebook page.
Awesome. Well, I hope everybody definitely goes to any one of those sources to reach out to you. That I feel like you've shared so much, and I'm sure a lot of this information is just part of your coaching program. So we appreciate you offering all this valuable information. And so if anybody has questions, definitely reach out to Jennifer or go to her page or her website. And we will also be continuing the conversation on long distance real estate investors group. So we can start engaging on all the different markets and how they handle, how the housing authority operates there. I'd love to get that conversation going. So that's it for today. Thanks for anybody that tuned in to our educational webinar for the long distance real estate investors group, all about renting to Section 8. Thank you.